Cyrodiil, the central province of Tamriel, the seat of an empire, home to the Imperials, known as the Heartland. The Great Alessian Empire formed in the year 243 of the First Era, after the slave rebellion of Larich of Alessia. The empire was strong and flourished until 361. During this time they ruled with an absolute monarchy. But in the year 361, its puritanical doctrines were formally adopted and enforced by the empire, and the leaders within the order were said to have wielded as much power as the emperors themselves. There was a sect within this order called the Marikadi Selective that was responsible for the Middle Dawn, the longest dragon break in history. Over time the order became increasingly resisted, with the Alessian priesthood becoming bloated, with too much variation, contradictions, and internal strife, promoting disputes across Cyrodiil, and prompting the kingdoms of West Cyrodiil of Colovia to resist the empire. They eventually severed their ties completely, establishing their own government, the Colovian Estates, which allowed them to maintain their culture and resist dilution within the empire. This is the story of Rislav Larich, and what he did that triggered Colovia's departure from the empire, and eventually led to the War of Righteousness, and to the dissolution of the Alessian Empire as a whole. This story begins on a springtide night of unseasonable cold. In the 448th year of the First Era, a child was born to Queen Lynada of Skingrad, who died very shortly after laying eyes on her newborn son. The boy's father, King Maurice of Skingrad, had little care for his son, as he already had plenty of heirs, with 3 sons and 4 daughters before him. His existence was so undistinguished that for the first 20 years of his life, very little was heard of him. He grew up just like any other young prince of Colovia would have, being schooled in the ways of hunting and battle. Etiquette and religion had very little involvement in his training, as were the ways of Colovia. This was opposed to the practices of the Nibonese. As little care his father had for him, he would still find use for him, as the kingdoms of Skingrad and Kvatch had fought over territory for many years. They would find common ground in the year 472. Prince Rislav was married off to Berlin, the daughter of King Justinius of Kvatch, to uphold a peace between the kingdoms. Just 6 years after this peace was made between the two cities, a great plague swept through the land that was Colovia. Among those who fell victim to it were the entirety of the royal family of Skingrad, with the only survivors being Rislav and his elder brother Dorald, who had only survived as he lived in the imperial city as a priest of Muruk when the plague had swept through the region. Upon hearing the news of his family, Dorald soon returned to his homeland to assume the throne. Dorald was the king's second son. He was simple-minded and evidently religious. He is said to have seen a vision in his youth that brought him from Skingrad to the imperial city and to priesthood of Muruk. The religion of the Alessian Empire saw no difference between spiritual and political matters, and it taught its followers that to defy the emperor was to defy the gods. Knowing this, it is not surprising what Dorald would do next, following his accession. On the first day, his first edict was to hand over the kingdom of Skingrad to the empire. This act sparked a reaction of shock and outrage throughout Colovia. Nowhere more so than in the court of Kvatch. Upon hearing the news, Rislav Larich rode east to his brother's kingdom with no more than 24 of his father-in-law's cavalry. It was not an impressive army by any means, but they had very little issue disposing of the guards who Dorald had sent to stop him. This was of course because all of those guards sent to stop him resented their new king just as much as Rislav had, and thus there was no actual battling. Upon his arrival at Skingrad, Rislav entered the courtyard where he faced his brother, in the same place they had grown up together. In typical Colovian fashion, there was no trial, no accusations of treason, no jury, no judge, only an executioner. "Thou art no brother of mine," Rislav Larich had said, and struck Dorald's head from his shoulders in one blow. He was crowned King of Skingrad, still holding the same bloody axe in his arms. Word would soon find its way to the imperial city of the news of Rislav's actions. Skingrad, which was once offered, was now being taken back. Emperor Gorius was a successful warrior. Only 8 months prior to Rislav's ascension, Gorius had faced the Nord, Yorick the White, in the fields of the frozen north in Skyrim. The High Chieftain was killed in the final battle at Fort Sungard. This, similarly, was a rebellious vassal, and thus, he has experience dealing with them. Upon hearing the news of Rislav's betrayal, the Alessian army marched westward, with numbers far exceeding what were even required to take the small city of Skingrad. Gorius could not have thought actual battle was likely. Rislav had little to no experience at warfare, and only a few days' practice at kingcraft. His kingdom, and all of the Colovian West, had just been ravaged by plague. The Alessians anticipated a mere show of arms, followed by a surrender. Rislav instead prepared for battle. He quickly inspected his troops and drew up plans. The statue of Rislav the Righteous, which now stands in Skingrad, is a romanticized version of the king, but not inaccurate, except in the armor represented. No bard of the Colovian West would have gone to the market so lightly protected, but it does, as we will see, include the most important additions of Rislav: his trained hawk and his fast horse. The emperor took the northern route and met King Rislav, who only had a few guards with him, at a low pass on the Gold Road. Rislav showed no sign of fear despite being faced against such a large and notable army, and with perfect politeness, he told the emperor that his party was far too large to be accommodated in the tiny kingdom of Skingrad. "Next time," Rislav said, "write before you come." The emperor was not a man of great humour, and believed Rislav to be influenced by sheer Gorath. He ordered his men to arrest the man. At that moment, the king of Skingrad raised his arm and sent his hawk flying into the sky. This was the signal that his army had been waiting for. The Alessian army were all within the pass, and in range of their arrows. King Rislav and his guards rode westward, fast, as if kissed by wild Kinnereth, not daring to look behind. His plan went faultlessly. The east end of the pass, behind the great army, was sealed by rolling boulders, giving the Alessian army no route of escape. The Skingrad archers then rained down their volley of arrows upon the men, high above, from their plateaus, safe from harm. Gorius was furious and chased Rislav into the highlands, while his army behind steadily grew smaller and smaller. In the highland forest, the emperor met the army of Rislav's father-in-law, the king of Kavach. Gorius's army still outnumbered them. However, they were exhausted, and their morale stunted. After an hour's battle, they retreated north into what is now the Imperial Reserve, and from there further north and east to slip back to nurse their wounds and pride in Nibene. This event marked the end of the Alessian hegemony, and some say this victory was divine favour. This event led to the kings of Colovia joining forces to resist imperial incursions. The clan Dureni, under the rule of Ryan, a friend of Rislav, were inspired to outlaw the Alessian religion throughout High Rock and began pushing into imperial territories. The High Chief of Skyrim, Hogue, now called Hogue Merkiller, also joined the resistance. It's for this reason the heroic king of Skingrad, who faced the Emperor's army virtually alone and triggered the end of an empire, rightfully deserves his title. And so ends the story of Rislav the Righteous.